The air inside Elar 3's inner district smelled like rust, coolant, and something older like ash soaked into metal. The corridors breathed faint heat from vents that hadn't been cleaned in years, sputtering with the uneven rhythm of a dying machine. Overhead lights flickered, their glow pale and strained, like they were tired of shining on so much ruin. Revan Soul moved through it all with slow, deliberate steps, his boots crunching on broken conduit casings and fractured glass. At 46, he had the posture of someone who carried too many memories and not enough purpose. His gray field coat was patched with sealant and streaked with dust, the kind that never washed out no matter how many storms passed through. He wasn't a scavenger. He didn't loot or pry open old storage lockers for scraps. He was a restoration grapher, one of the few who still documented the slow death of places like this. He mapped heat leaks, structural decay, and corrosion points for archives no one cared to read anymore. His portable scanner blinked green, then blue, humming as it traced temperature gradients across the cracked walls. For Revan, this wasn't a job. It was the closest thing he had to meaning. When cities crumbled, someone had to remember where the damage began. He adjusted the strap of his leather shoulder bag, worn so thin it had the texture of paper. His fingers brushed the edges of data rolls inside, each one filled with coordinates and readings he'd collected over the past decade. He paused near the balcony of a collapsed metro platform, brushing dust from a corroded rail. Beyond the glassless window, the city stretched in silent tiers of broken towers, its upper levels lost to smog and faded light. It felt like the end of a story no one wanted to finish writing. The scanner chirped. A faint heat signature bloomed on its display, small, irregular. Revan frowned, tilting the device. It wasn't mechanical, not from a vent or a faulty grid panel. It pulsed like a heartbeat. He followed the signal through a side corridor where the walls buckled inward, stepping carefully over debris. At the edge of a broken exhaust duct, he saw them. A woman sat against the wall, her back straight despite the cold. Her skin was a pale lavender that shimmered faintly under the dull light, etched with symmetrical lines that glowed like threads of soft silver. Her clothes were stitched from scraps of fabric, once formal but now weathered and rough. Beside her, a child was curled up, barefoot, with white-violet curls clinging to her forehead. The girl's small body was wrapped in a thin layer of patched fabric, and her gaze was fixed on the ground as though looking too long at strangers was dangerous. Revan froze, his instincts screaming to move on. The colony had unspoken rules about people like them, unregistered, unwanted. The system didn't chase them. It just let them disappear in the shadows. The woman's eyes, silver and steady, met his without a word. She wasn't begging. She wasn't asking for help. She simply existed, quiet and unyielding. He walked past them. His boots echoed in the narrow corridor, the sound too loud against the hollow silence. 2 hours later, as he climbed the stairwell of the dome tower where his flat was, the wind from the turbines whipped fine dust against his coat. He was already thinking about uploading structural data when something tugged lightly at his shirt. He turned sharply. The girl stood there, half hidden in shadow, her violet eyes wide and unblinking. Her cheeks were raw from windburn, her tunic damp at the hem where it had dragged through puddles. She said nothing at first, just stared at him like she was measuring the space between them. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled but her words were clear. "Can I call you Dad?" Revan felt his chest tighten, a sharp prickling rising in his throat. He wasn't angry or uncomfortable, just uncertain, like something fragile had cracked open inside him. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't pretending. Behind her, the woman appeared, standing just beyond the broken light strip. She didn't speak or gesture for the girl to return. She simply watched, her expression unreadable. Revan stared at them both, then at the empty doorway of his flat. He keyed his outdated access code into the panel and held the door open. He didn't know why. Maybe because the girl's voice sounded like something he had lost long ago. Maybe because he was tired of walking past people who were supposed to vanish. They stepped inside without hesitation. For the first time in years, Revan didn't feel like a man wandering through ruins. For the first time, he felt like he had stopped to build something that wasn't broken yet. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the wall heater, a sound Revan had long grown used to, though now it felt different with two strangers sitting in the soft amber light. He stood near the door for a moment, not sure what to do next. His flat had never been meant for guests, just a single room with a lofted sleeping cot, a battered table, and maps pinned to every corner of the walls. He wasn't sure if Naali and her daughter belonged here, but something in his chest wouldn't let him turn them away. Naali sat cross-legged on the floor, her daughter leaning against her side. She didn't ask for food, but the way her hands hovered near the small heating unit told Revan enough. He crossed to the cabinet, retrieved a thermal canister, and poured out 3 bowls of broth. The smell of warmed protein filled the air, faint but comforting. He handed one to the girl. She looked up, blinked once, then whispered, "This tastes clean," before taking a small sip. Revan froze at that, realizing how long it had probably been since they'd eaten anything safe. Naali accepted her bowl with a quiet nod. Her posture was still guarded, but there was no fear in her silver eyes. She was not like the desperate refugees Revan had seen in other districts. There was a kind of poise about her, as if she had once belonged to something far more dignified before the collapse stripped it all away. The girl, Aleni, though he didn't yet know her name, stayed curled beside her mother, fingers tracing the cracks in the floor tiles as if memorizing them. Revan sat across from them, his arms folded, not speaking. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't sure if words would even matter here. The silence stretched until Naali broke it with a voice that was calm but edged with exhaustion. "You didn't have to let us in," she said. Revan met her gaze. "I didn't plan to," he replied, his tone flat. "Then why?" she asked. He didn't have an answer. The truth was, when Aleni had tugged at his shirt, he'd felt something sharp twist inside him, something that reminded him of his own childhood before the war, before the endless loss that had made him retreat into his work. Instead of answering, he said, "Eat while it's warm." They did. When morning came, Revan woke to the quiet rhythm of someone moving through his space. He sat up on the lofted cot and looked down to see Naali cleaning. His old shirt hung loosely on her, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She moved with steady precision, wiping dust from the floor and sorting through his scattered tools. The girl was curled by the heating unit, an old survey tablet clutched in her hands as if it were a storybook. "You're up early," Revan said. Naali glanced up but didn't stop. "Your place needed it. We can't just sit here like shadows." Revan climbed down the ladder and crouched near the heating unit where the girl sat. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She looked up, her violet eyes bright despite the sleepless night. "Aleni," she said quietly. "And your mother?" "Naali," he nodded. "I'm Revan." Aleni smiled faintly, a small, quick expression that vanished almost as fast as it appeared. Later that day, Revan powered up his portable scanner to log structural damage in the next sector. But when he checked the utility readings on his wall terminal, his breath caught. A yellow variance alert blinked in the corner. Heat signature inconsistency unit 17B. They were already being noticed. Revan closed the alert quickly, rewriting the heat data packets. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy them time. He turned to find Naali watching him from across the room. "You cover our presence," she said softly. "It's that or they'll come looking," he replied. "You risk your own status for us?" Revan gave a dry, humorless laugh. I don't have much status left to risk." Naali studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "We've been hiding for months. We were flagged when Aleni wandered too close to a scanning node. I thought we could outrun the system." "You can't," Revan said, his tone quieter now. "Not forever." That evening, Aleni sat beside him on the floor with one of his old sector maps spread across her lap. She traced the lines of collapsed corridors and faded boundaries with surprising accuracy, her small fingers moving as though she could see the city in her head. "You understand this?" Revan asked. She nodded. "It's like remembering places we've never been," she said softly. Naali looked up from where she was sorting supplies. "She's always been like that. She remembers patterns, layouts, even ones she's only seen once. When we were hiding near the railport, she would draw the platforms in the dirt from memory." Revan studied the girl, sensing that this ability was more than just talent. It was focus, resilience, something that came from living on the edge of survival. That night, when the lights dimmed and the room fell quiet, Aleni crept to Revan's side. She curled against his arm and whispered, "You let me call you Dad." Revan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He didn't know how to answer, so he said nothing. But when he looked down at her small face, pale from the cold, he felt something unfamiliar, something that felt like belonging. For the first time in years, Revan didn't feel like a man drifting through ruins. He felt like someone who had found a reason to stay. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the wall heater, a sound Revan had long grown used to, though now it felt different with two strangers sitting in the soft amber light. He stood near the door for a moment, not sure what to do next. His flat had never been meant for guests, just a single room with a lofted sleeping cot, a battered table, and maps pinned to every corner of the walls. He wasn't sure if Naali and her daughter belonged here, but something in his chest wouldn't let him turn them away. Naali sat cross-legged on the floor, her daughter leaning against her side. She didn't ask for food, but the way her hands hovered near the small heating unit told Revan enough. He crossed to the cabinet, retrieved a thermal canister, and poured out 3 bowls of broth. The smell of warmed protein filled the air, faint but comforting. He handed one to the girl. She looked up, blinked once, then whispered, "This tastes clean," before taking a small sip. Revan froze at that, realizing how long it had probably been since they'd eaten anything safe. Naali accepted her bowl with a quiet nod. Her posture was still guarded, but there was no fear in her silver eyes. She was not like the desperate refugees Revan had seen in other districts. There was a kind of poise about her, as if she had once belonged to something far more dignified before the collapse stripped it all away. The girl, Aleni, though he didn't yet know her name, stayed curled beside her mother, fingers tracing the cracks in the floor tiles as if memorizing them. Revan sat across from them, his arms folded, not speaking. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't sure if words would even matter here. The silence stretched until Naali broke it with a voice that was calm but edged with exhaustion. "You didn't have to let us in," she said. Revan met her gaze. "I didn't plan to," he replied, his tone flat. "Then why?" she asked. He didn't have an answer. The truth was, when Aleni had tugged at his shirt, he'd felt something sharp twist inside him, something that reminded him of his own childhood before the war, before the endless loss that had made him retreat into his work. Instead of answering, he said, "Eat while it's warm." They did. When morning came, Revan woke to the quiet rhythm of someone moving through his space. He sat up on the lofted cot and looked down to see Naali cleaning. His old shirt hung loosely on her, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She moved with steady precision, wiping dust from the floor and sorting through his scattered tools. The girl was curled by the heating unit, an old survey tablet clutched in her hand as if it were a storybook. "You're up early," Revan said. Naali glanced up but didn't stop. Your place needed it. We can't just sit here like shadows. Revan climbed down the ladder and crouched near the heating unit where the girl sat. What's your name? He asked softly. She looked up, her violet eyes bright despite the sleepless night. Aleni, she said quietly. And your mother? Naali, he nodded. I'm Revan. Aleni smiled faintly, a small, quick expression that vanished almost as fast as it appeared. Later that day, Revan powered up his portable scanner to log structural damage in the next sector. But when he checked the utility readings on his wall terminal, his breath caught. A yellow variance alert blinked in the corner. Heat signature inconsistency unit 17B. They were already being noticed. Revan closed the alert quickly, rewriting the heat data packets. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy them time. He turned to find Naali watching him from across the room. Cover our presence, she said softly. It's that, or they'll come looking, he replied. You risk your own status for us? Revan gave a dry, humorless laugh. I don't have much status left to risk. Naali studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, We've been hiding for months. We were flagged when Aleni wandered too close to a scanning node. I thought we could outrun the system. You can't, Revan said, his tone quieter now. Not forever. That evening, Aleni sat beside him on the floor with one of his old sector maps spread across her lap. She traced the lines of collapsed corridors and faded boundaries with surprising accuracy, her small fingers moving as though she could see the city in her head. You understand this? Revan asked. She nodded. It's like remembering places we've never been, she said softly. Naali looked up from where she was sorting supplies. She's always been like that. She remembers patterns, layouts, even ones she's only seen once. When we were hiding near the railport, she would draw the platforms in the dirt from memory. Revan studied the girl, sensing that this ability was more than just talent. It was focus, resilience, something that came from living on the edge of survival. That night, when the lights dimmed and the room felt quiet, Aleni crept to Revan's side. She curled against his arm and whispered, You let me call you Dad. Revan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He didn't know how to answer, so he said nothing. But when he looked down at her small face, pale from the cold, he felt something unfamiliar, something that felt like belonging. The rain had returned by the time Revan powered up his scanner the next morning. Thin streams leaked through the cracked skylight panels above the corridor, dripping into rusted buckets someone had abandoned years ago. The smell of wet metal filled the air. Revan stood at the wall terminal, his jaw tight as he stared at the flashing yellow alert. Heat signature discrepancy detected. Unit 17B. The system had flagged them again. He knew what came next if he didn't act fast. Automated inquiries, data audits, a knock on his door that could erase Naali and Aleni in a single sweep. He knelt by the terminal, fingers flying across the keypad. His registry cache was already running an override loop, but the civic grid had gotten smarter. He rerouted excess energy draw into an abandoned unit across the tower, splicing the logs so that any variance looked like maintenance bleed off. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold for a few days. Maybe. Behind him, Naali's voice cut through the tense quiet. You're rewriting your records again, she said, standing barefoot near the window. The soft glow of her lavender skin reflected against the glass. Is that how you've survived all these years? By pretending to be invisible? Revan didn't turn. It's the only way to stay off their radar. If the system doesn't see you, it doesn't erase you. Naali tilted her head, her silver eyes steady. And when it does see you? He looked over his shoulder, meeting her gaze. Then you hope someone like me is willing to fight back. For a moment, neither spoke. Aleni was seated on the floor between them, stacking empty data canisters into a careful tower. Her small hands trembled slightly with concentration. She didn't seem to notice the tension in the room, but Revan knew she felt it. Children always did. 2 hours later, while Revan was repairing a damaged heat vent outside the unit, he noticed something that made his stomach sink. A digital ping had hit the building's external node. No login request, no maintenance ID, just a quiet probe. Someone was scanning for life signs inside the tower. He returned to the flat, shaking rainwater from his coat. Naali looked up immediately, sensing his mood. "What happened?" "Someone's watching the building," he said, his tone flat. Aleni paused mid-doodle, her violet eyes widening. "Will they take us away?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Revan crouched beside her. "No one's taking you." "Not while I'm here." He glanced at Naali, whose expression had hardened into quiet determination. "We've been chased before," she said, her voice low. "I won't run again, not with her." Revan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we make sure they don't find us." That night, the wind howled against the dome as if the entire city were holding its breath. Revan stayed awake long after Aleni had fallen asleep, his fingers buried in the guts of an old maintenance drone. He was modifying its heat vents to mimic a body signature, an extra ghost reading that would confuse the scanners. Naali sat across from him, her legs folded under her, silently watching his hands. "You build like someone who's fixing more than metal," she said quietly. Revan tightened a screw, not looking up. "I fix what I can." "Is that why you took us in?" He paused, the question cutting through him like a wire pulled too tight. "I don't know why," he admitted. "Maybe because you weren't asking for anything. Maybe because he glanced toward the sleeping girl, "called me Dad." Naali's gaze softened, just slightly. "She doesn't call anyone that. Not since her father died at the gate riots." Revan didn't answer, but something shifted in the room. The silence no longer felt like a void, it felt alive, like a thread tying them together. The next morning, Revan woke to find Aleni sitting cross-legged beside his maps, tracing the lines of collapsed districts with a piece of graphite. Her drawings were too exact for a child her age. She looked up when he crouched beside her. "You like maps?" he asked. She nodded. "They tell me where the broken places are. I don't forget them." Naali, who was cleaning the small kitchen, added softly, "She remembers everything. It's her way of surviving. She maps every path we take, every corner." "We hide in." Revan watched the girl for a long moment. Her small hands moved with quiet focus, sketching out the streets of a city that no longer lived. He felt a strange kind of pride, like she was carrying pieces of the world he'd spent his life trying to remember. By midday, the terminal chimed again. Another variance warning, this time stronger. Revan's stomach tightened. He wiped for the first time in years. Revan didn't feel like a man drifting through ruins. He felt like someone who had found a reason to stay. The rain eased overnight, but its smell lingered in the flat like a reminder that the world outside never stopped eroding. When Revan opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Aleni curled near the heating unit, using one of his old coats as a blanket. Her breathing was soft, steady, almost too quiet for someone so young. Beyond her, Naali stood at the narrow counter, preparing what little food they had. The soft gray light of the dawn cycle caught on her lavender skin, tracing the faint, glowing lines beneath her surface. She looked like someone carved from another life, a life that had known both grace and ruin. Revan sat up slowly. His body ached from the cold metal floor, but the sight of them, alive and moving in his space, made him hesitate. There was something about their presence that felt both alien and inevitable, as if they'd always been meant to be here, in this forgotten place. "You didn't sleep," Revan said quietly. Naali glanced over her shoulder. "Not much," she replied, her tone neutral. "I was listening." "For what?" "For footsteps, for drones, for anything that might mean we have to run." Revan climbed down the ladder from the lofted cot and crossed to the terminal. The grid logs were waiting like an accusation. He scanned the data, scrolling through heating patterns and water usage summaries. His manual edits had worked, but only just. The system had tried to reconcile their heat variance 3 times during the night. If anyone at the Civic Utility Office took a closer look, they would know something was wrong. They'll notice. "US soon," Revan muttered, half to himself. Naali stopped what she was doing. "Then what?" "Then we buy more time," he said. His fingers moved across the console, adjusting false data packets, redirecting energy flow to mimic maintenance bleed off. Every keystroke felt like a wager. If he made one wrong move, the audit bots would see through the forgery. By midday, the flat was warmer. Revan had tightened the radiator's intake valves to push heat through the floor tiles. Aleni sat cross-legged on the ground, building towers from his spare tool cases, her small face tight with concentration. "You like making things," Revan observed, crouching beside her. "I like when things don't fall," she said simply. He watched her stack another case on top of the tower, each piece carefully balanced. She wasn't playing, she was calculating. It reminded him of himself when he was younger, tinkering with broken devices just to see if he could make them work again. Later, while Aleni napped, Revan and Naali sat opposite each other at the small table. A quiet tension had settled between them, the kind that felt like the edge of a storm. Naali's silver eyes stayed fixed on him, unblinking. "You're risking too much," she said softly. Revan leaned back in his chair. "I've got nothing else to risk." "That's not true," she said. "You're risking her." He paused. The words hit harder than he expected. "She calls you Dad," Naali continued. "She believes it already. Do you?" Revan exhaled slowly, his hand brushing across the table's rough surface. "I don't know what I believe anymore," he admitted. "But I know I can't let anyone take her. Or you." Something flickered across Naali's face, then a small, fragile shift in her expression. Not a smile, not exactly, but a recognition that something between them had changed. That night, the outside world pressed closer. Revan picked up faint surveillance signals on the Civic grid, a pattern of low-frequency sweeps that didn't match. Standard maintenance scans. Someone was probing the district, looking for heat clusters. He worked until his hands ached, building false signatures using an old maintenance drone. By rerouting its internal heat coils, he could make the scanners think there was a faulty machine. On the opposite side of the building, it wasn't foolproof, but it would confuse the readings for now. Naali watched him from across the room, sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up. "You do all this without hesitation," she said. "But why us?" Revan set his tools down and looked at her. "Because I've spent half my life recording ruins. I'm tired of just watching things disappear." The silence between them deepened, heavy but not cold. For a moment, Revan felt as though the flat wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was becoming something else. Something like a home. In the middle of the night, Aleni woke with a soft cry. She stumbled toward Revan's sleeping mat and curled against his side, whispering, "If we stay quiet, the bad sensors won't find us, right?" Revan smoothed her hair, his chest tightening. "Right," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. From across the room, Naali's voice came, soft but steady. "She trusts you. That's not something she gives easily." Revan met her eyes through the dim light. "Then I'll keep earning it," he said. The next day, the buildings. External sensors pinged twice in the span of an hour. Revan's stomach sank as he read the logs. Whoever was watching wasn't going to stop. When he told Naali, she didn't panic. Instead, she stood taller, her gaze steady. "Then we'll fight to stay here," she said, and for the first time, Revan realized he wasn't just protecting them, he was ready to stand with them. The warning arrived as a hollow chime on the wall terminal just before dawn. Revan rubbed the sleep from his eyes and stared at the message. Occupancy verification. Scheduled Unit 17B 48 hours. The words felt heavier than they should have, like they had been etched into the air itself. It wasn't a random sweep this time. It was a direct check, and he knew what that meant. If the inspector found Naali and Aleni, the system would erase them from the grid. No hearings. No appeals. Revan sat for a long time without moving, his breathing slowed, his jaw tightening. He glanced toward the heating unit where Aleni was still sleeping, curled into a ball beneath his coat. Naali stood in the kitchenette, her hair loose around her shoulders, stirring what remained of their broth. She noticed the look on his face before he said a word. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice low and steady. He showed her the terminal message. Naali didn't flinch. She just set the pot down and came closer, her silver eyes locked on his. "How long?" "2 days," Revan replied. She nodded once, almost as if she had been expecting this. "Then we prepare." The next 48 hours stretched like wire pulled too tight. Revan moved through the flat with mechanical precision, adjusting every detail that might betray them. He scrubbed the heat logs, rewriting usage history to mimic the habits of a single occupant. He programmed the maintenance drone to pulse false thermal signatures in adjacent rooms, creating ghost patterns on the scans. Every keystroke made him sweat. Naali helped in ways he hadn't expected. She taught Aleni how to answer questions simply, without hesitation, without fear. They practiced for hours. Naali crouched beside her daughter, whispering, "Name? Aleni Velra. Who do you live with?" "Mom and Revan." "Who's Revan?" "My dad." Each time Aleni answered, her voice grew steadier. But when Revan looked at her, he felt that tightness in his chest again, the same one that started the night she tugged at his shirt. He didn't deserve the title she gave him, but hearing it filled him with something close to warmth. On the morning of the inspection, the air felt heavier, like the building itself knew what was coming. The corridor outside was silent. Even the usual hum of the turbine seemed to hold back, waiting. Revan dressed in his old field jacket, his hands moving slowly as he buttoned it. Naali watched him from the center of the room. She had dressed differently today, wearing one of his clean shirts and fastening it carefully. There was something almost ceremonial about the way she moved, calm, precise, as if she were preparing for more than just a routine visit. "Are you ready for this?" Revan asked. Naali's expression didn't waver. "I've faced worse than an inspector," she said. Then quieter, "But this time I'm not facing it alone." The knock came at 9:04, sharp and deliberate. One knock. Not loud, but final. Like someone drawing a line across the ground. Revan took a slow breath and pressed the door panel. The door slid open halfway, revealing a woman in a gray civic inspector's coat. She was tall, mid-40s, her hair pinned back under a weather hood. Her expression was neither warm nor cruel, it was blank, efficient, the face of someone who had seen too many rooms like his. "Revan Soul," she said, her voice monotone. He nodded. "Unit 17B. Occupancy verification. Standard tier. Duration, 15 minutes. Revan stepped aside to let her in. Her portable scanner hovered at shoulder height, a metallic orb humming softly, its sensors sweeping the space like a searching eye. Naali stood near the table, her posture relaxed but poised. Aleni was seated beside her, small hands folded on her lap. The inspector's gaze flicked to the child. "Name?" Aleni looked at her mother, then at Revan. "Aleni Velra," she said clearly. The inspector's brow lifted slightly. Relation to primary occupant? My dad, Aleni answered without hesitation. Raven's jaw tightened, but he kept his face neutral. The inspector entered data into her wrist console. Documentation? She asked. Registry server crash, Revan said smoothly. Her records were lost in the substation riots. I'm listed as parental proxy. The inspector didn't respond. She walked to the terminal, reviewing logs. The silence was suffocating. Every second felt like a countdown. Naali's fingers curled tightly against her side, though she didn't move. Her silver eyes stayed locked on Revan as though daring him to falter. Revan forced himself to remain calm, his breath slow, controlled. The inspector studied the data for 90 seconds, the hum of the scanner filling the room like static. Then she spoke. Thermal consistency confirmed. Water usage is within range. Minor timestamp skew noted but corrected in logs. Revan exhaled quietly. Anything else? The inspector turned to him. No irregularities. Verification complete. You'll receive a confirmation update within 24 hours. She walked toward the door, but just before stepping out, she paused. Her voice lowered, softer but pointed. This unit was flagged. As inactive 3 months ago. I don't see that often. Places like this usually stay cold. Revan didn't answer. The inspector looked back once, then left, the door sealing behind her. The silence that followed was thick, almost overwhelming. Aleni stood and walked straight to Revan, hugging his waist with small arms that shook just slightly. Did we pass? She asked. Revan looked down at her, then at Naali, who was watching him with a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Yeah, he said softly. We passed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Naali crossed the room and sat beside him on the floor, leaning her shoulder into his. You did more than pass, she murmured. Revan didn't know what to say, so he just stayed there, with both of them pressed close, as the weight of survival slowly gave way to something that felt dangerously like belonging. The day after the inspection, the flat felt different, lighter, but not entirely safe. The civic verification had passed, but Revan knew that victory was only temporary. Systems like the one running LR3 didn't forget anomalies. They simply logged them quietly, waiting for patterns to emerge. He'd bought them time, but not freedom. Revan sat at the table, his tools spread across a crate he used as a workbench. He wasn't working, not really, just turning an old sensor coil in his hand, the metal cool against his palm. Across the room, Aleni was sketching another map, her fingers tracing the jagged outline of the broken metro lines. She hummed softly, a sound that was almost too gentle for a place this cold. Naali moved silently through the flat, checking the heating unit and folding blankets with meticulous care. She glanced at him occasionally, her expression unreadable. There was something unspoken between them since the inspection, something neither of them knew how to name. You didn't sleep, Naali said finally, breaking the silence. Not much, Revan admitted. I kept thinking about the inspector, the way she looked at this place. It's like she knew we weren't supposed to be here, but didn't care enough to push it. Naali's silver eyes lingered on him. Or maybe she saw something she remembered. People get tired of following rules that erase the living. Revan studied her for a moment. She stood by the window, the pale gray light brushing her lavender skin. There was strength in the way she held herself, but also a kind of quiet grief. Like someone who had learned long ago that safety was a temporary illusion. By midday, a new message pinged the wall terminal. It wasn't a warning this time, just a notification. Routine civic log sync pending. But to Revan, it felt like a threat. He knew the sync would reanalyze occupancy metrics, looking for irregularities he might have missed. He crouched in front of the terminal, adjusting the cache files he'd manipulated. As he typed, Aleni walked over, watching his hands. Are you hiding us? She asked suddenly, her voice small but steady. Revan froze for a second, then nodded. Yes. Because they don't want to see us? He looked at her, really looked. Because they don't know how to see you, he said. But I do. Aleni smiled faintly, then held out the stylus she'd been using. Then write us in so they can't erase us. That night, Revan did exactly that. He pulled out his old identity key, a piece of tech he hadn't used in years, and connected it to the terminal. Naali sat beside him, her breath warm on his shoulder as she watched him type. You're changing your record, she said softly. I'm adding you, he replied. Both of you. You don't even know us, Naali said, but her voice lacked resistance. It sounded more like wonder than protest. I know enough, Revan said without looking up. When the edits were complete, the system recognized their new configuration. Revan Soul, Custodian. Naali Velra, Dependent. Aleni Minor Cohabitant. It wasn't perfect, but it was real enough to survive audits. Later, when Aleni was asleep, Naali approached him near the window. The lights from the city outside were faint and broken, but they cast a soft glow across her face. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I wanted to, Revan replied. Naali stood still for a moment, then stepped closer. Her hand brushed the edge of his coat. You see us, she murmured. Revan turned to face her, his pulse quickening. I see you, he said simply. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was more intimate than anything they had shared. The quiet between them was thick, alive, like a breath waiting to be released. The next day, the civic grid pinged again. Revan checked the logs and saw a faint probe on the building's exterior. Someone was still watching. He turned to Naali. They might come back, he said. Then let them, she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. This time, we're not running. Revan looked at her and realized something had shifted inside him. He wasn't just hiding them anymore. He was fighting for them. For her. For the girl who called him Dad like it was the only name she trusted. And for the first time in years, Revan felt alive. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Elar 3 slick and glistening beneath the fractured skylight dome. From his window, Revan watched the upper turbines turn slowly, their blades creaking like tired bones. For 3 days the building had been quiet, too quiet. The last inspection might have gone smoothly, but something about the silence felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. The flat had changed since they first entered it. Blankets were folded neatly over low crates. The small table was now clean and organized, and the air smelled faintly of preserved fruit that Naali had warmed on the heater. It no longer felt like a shelter for one man drifting through ruins. It felt alive, but beneath that warmth was tension. A new message arrived on the wall terminal, its tone less routine, more formal. Secondary verification notice, Tower 17B confirmed structural access in 24 hours. Revan stared at the message for a long time, his hands curling into fists. At his sides, this wasn't just another random audit. Someone in the Civic Data Center had flagged their logs for deeper inspection. Whoever came this time wouldn't be satisfied with quiet answers. Naali stood behind him, her arms folded. There. Coming again, she said softly, not as a question but a fact. Yes, Revan replied, his voice tight. And this time, they'll be looking harder. Aleni, sitting cross-legged by the heating vent, looked up from the map she was drawing. Do we have to hide under the table again? Revan knelt beside her. No, he said firmly. Where? Not hiding anymore. The girl blinked at him, uncertain. Naali came closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. You really mean that, don't you? Yes, Revan said, meeting her gaze. If they want to come here and tell me this family isn't real, they'll have to come through me first. The next day passed like a countdown. Revan checked every inch of the flat-ceiling heat leaks, balancing water draws, and rerouting power surges to make their unit look unremarkable. But no amount of data manipulation could hide the truth if someone decided to search in person. That evening, Revan sat on the edge of his cot, sharpening an old utility blade he hadn't touched in years. Not because he planned to fight, though. The thought crossed his mind, but because it made him feel less helpless. Naali watched him silently from across the room, her silver eyes reflecting the soft glow of the heating unit. "You're preparing for a war that might not come," she said quietly. "It always comes," Revan replied. Naali walked over, stopping just in front of him. She reached down, taking the blade gently from his hands. "If they come, we face them together. But no matter what they see in their logs, they can't erase what's here." Her hand pressed lightly against his chest. Revan looked up at her, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You believe that?" "I have to," she said. "It's the only way I've kept her safe this long." The knock came the next morning. Not one, but three, sharp and deliberate. Revan felt his entire body tighten. He walked to the door, glanced back once at Naali and Aleni, then pressed the manual unlock. Two people stood outside this time. A man and a woman, both wearing black civic authority coats, the kind reserved for deeper enforcement checks. Behind them hovered a heavy-duty scanner drone, its lenses flickering red. "Revan Soul," the man said flatly. "Unit 17B occupancy confirmation and data alignment required." "Step aside." Revan didn't move immediately. "We went through this 3 days ago." "This is secondary verification," the woman replied, her tone sharp. "There are irregularities in your file." Revan's pulse quickened. He stepped back slowly, allowing them inside. Naali stood behind the table, her expression calm but alert. Aleni clung to her side, wide-eyed but silent. The drone scanned the room, emitting faint pulses of light. Revan's registry edits held at first. Heat signatures matched. Water usage was normal. But then the woman's wrist console beeped. "Your record shows an inactivity flag," she said, frowning. "Revan Soul status, inactive, presumed decommissioned." "That's not a valid status for a living occupant," Revan froze. He hadn't expected this. Somewhere in the civic archives, he'd been erased, already marked as a ghost in the system. "Explain," the man said, his voice cold. Revan straightened his shoulders. "I can't explain their errors," he said firmly. "But I'm standing right here. You tell me, do I look inactive to you?" The woman hesitated, glancing at her partner. "You should have been off-grid months ago. No energy allocations, no active registry markers." Naali stepped forward then, her voice calm, but razor sharp. "Maybe your system doesn't know how to recognize what's real anymore." The man frowned. "What are you?" "A mother," Naali said. "And this is my family." For a long moment, the officers stood there, uncertain. The scanner drone hovered between them, its sensors blinking like a heartbeat. Then, almost as if making a decision, the woman powered down her console. "Nothing to report," she said quietly. "Unit 17B is stable." Her partner started to protest, but she shook her head. "Let's move." They left without another word. When the door sealed shut, the room stayed silent for a long time. Then Aleni ran to Revan, throwing her arms around his waist. "Did we stay, people?" She whispered. Revan looked at Naali, who was watching him with tears she refused to let fall. He knelt and hugged the girl tightly. "Yes," he said softly, "we did." That night, as the city outside flickered with failing lights, Revan sat by the window. Naali came to him, leaning into his side. "You know what this means," she said. "That we're ghosts?" He asked. That we're free, she said. If the system thinks you're gone, it can't touch us. We don't belong to their files. Anymore. Revan smiled faintly, looking at Aleni asleep on the mat, her small hand curled into his coat. Then we'll build something better, he said, even if no one sees it but us. Days later, the flat no longer felt like ruins. It felt like the beginning of a new world. Aleni laughed softly as she drew new maps, marking safe paths through the dead city. Naali hummed while cooking, her voice low and warm, filling the room with something that felt like hope. Revan watched them. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just a man documenting the collapse. He was building something that mattered. A home. A family dot, and if the world outside ever came knocking again, they would answer together.